Fundamentals of pot limit Omaha. There are three fundamental metrics on which you can judge a pot limit Omaha hand before the flop. Those are connectivity, high card strength, and position. So you can see here on the slide, we've got Jack 10, 9, 8 as sort of your ideal rundown, no gaps, highly connected, all four cards working together. That's the sort of connectivity you want in pot limit Omaha. Now, if you have a gap, that's usually fine. Jack 10, 9, 7. Ideally, you want the gap at the bottom so as not to impact the nuttiness of your straight, but often one gappers are going to be okay. Generally, you want to stay away from the two gappers, maybe if it's double suited and it's an okay situation. Now, looking at high card strength, we've got here on the left, maybe it's a little cut off, ace, king, queen, jack, all high cards. And then the example of a bad high card strength hand, 3, 3, 10, 7. So high card strength is very important. When your cards are higher, they're going to hit the top end of stuff. If you make two pair, you're going to have top two pair or higher two pair than your opponent. If your opponent's playing lower cards, if you make straight over straight, you're going to have the high end of that. And that's where a lot of money is made in pot limit Omaha, is when you make the nuts and your opponent makes the second nuts. Often, this will be, you'll put the money in when you're drawing, but you'll be drawing smoother and you'll have the edge because of that. So, domination in PLO is often in the form of a superior draw or a strong main hand and a draw, or of course a very strong main hand. So the third factor here is suitedness, and in 4-card PLO, a hand can be double suited, which I think is sort of self-evident. Single suited, tri-suited, where you have three of a suit, which is of less value than single suited because you've got one of your own outs, so it's going to be harder to make a flush. Still, often single suited hands are playable, especially in situations where you should be raising a lot of hands, like on the button, the cutoff, or defending the big blind. Then mono suited, same thing but worse. You have four of the same suit, and again, just you've got one more of your out, so you're going to make the flush that much less frequently. And of course, a rainbow hand where you have all different suits. So suitedness is multiplied by high card strength. Okay. So what I mean by that is if you have a high card hand and it's suited or double suited, that's really good. Okay. If you have sort of a medium high card hand or like a medium card hand, like 8, 7, 6, 5, sure, it's better to be double suited, but you're not really going for the 8 high flush. That's not usually going to be a winner. Maybe when your head's up, but it's still not something you want to bank on. Okay. It's not something you're going to be value betting usually, or you might if it's heads up. So suitedness is multiplied by high card strength. The nut suit is very important. Okay, that's sort of in a category of its own. The nut suit, you're going to dominate pretty much any draw, especially multi-way, especially if you have something to go with it. Low suits are less relevant. And then finally, one last point about suitedness is that double suited hands are a good rubric for selecting 3-bets. This is because double suited hands play very well in heads-up situations where your low suit is much more likely to be good than multi-way. You're only going against one guy. And this also ensures that your frequencies are kept in check because double-suited hands are pretty rare. So it's just a nice way if you're struggling to decide when to 3-bet. Now, you don't want to 3-bet just any double-suited hand. Having the ace is also very important. And then you got to look at, is it a situation where we're three betting a lot? For example, in the small blind versus the button, that's a situation where you want to three bet a lot, relatively speaking, maybe 12% of hands or something, versus an under the gun raiser who's going to have a lot of strong hands. Then if you're in the small blind, you can't three bet as frequently. Or an even more extreme case would be if you're an MP against an under the gun open. Uh, at this point, you can't three bet very much at all. Just basically aces and then your strongest like double suited rundowns and strong double suited ace high hands. Like ace jack 10-9 double suited, that sort of stuff. Uh, so yeah, just something to keep in mind, especially if you're in a low three bet situation spot. But really, anytime you're deciding to three bet, making sure you're double suited, as well as having some other attractive qualities to your hand, is a good way to select. All right, there are 6 positions in a 6 max pot limit Omaha table. We've got them labeled here: under the gun, MP, cutoff, button, small blind, big blind. And this is cut off here, but what it says is um, don't, well, don't flat call unless you're the button or the big blind, I think is what it says. Um, so, so here are some RFI figures. This is a pretty conservative opening range, and we're gonna look at some examples next. But yeah, just basically, if it's folded to you in these positions, these are the sort of percentage of hands you want to open roughly. This is a conservative range, which is good. If you're just getting started, then you want to play a little tighter than optimal. This is also going to take into account the high rake, especially if you're playing at micro stakes or even low stakes. Rake's a big factor in pot limit Omaha. So again, you want to play just a little bit tighter than optimal. Now, the other thing, though, is that if your opponents are playing very loose, then you can open up a bit and play a little looser than optimal, or looser than at least I've suggested here. All right, so I've gone ahead and I've stolen these pre-flop ranges from Upswing Poker. They're really good. So Upswing Poker, it's an online training site. You can Google them, Upswing Poker, Doug Polk, really great people, and they've made this pre-flop chart. I'm going to link to it in the description of this video. These are really good pre-flop ranges, and a really good pre-flop chart that they've made. They give it out to the public. You just have to sign up for it. Again, I'm going to link it in the description of this video. So you should go ahead and check that out. Download it. It's pretty good. So they've given here 17.9% open from under the gun RFI. This is based on Munker Solver simulations, and it's for a lower rake environment, though. It's for like 2-4 plus or something like that. I'm not sure exactly. But what they do is they give you the worst opens here, because Omaha starting charts are very, very complicated. Jane Andes has some good ones as well. But basically, they give you just the worst opens. And from that, you can sort of deduce or infer what other hands you should be opening here. So, for example, this is the pairs under the gun RFI range, 17.9%, and you see here for double suited hands, actually opening 2-2 Jack 10 double suited. That's a hand that probably not a lot of people are going to open under the gun. I was looking at a discussion online. I think it's from 2000, but this guy saying, "Oh, Queen 9-8-7 double suited under the gun. I'm not sure I'm going to open that hand." And here, we're looking at much lighter opens like 10-7-6-5. That's a similar structure. So it also tells you, like, for example, 87% of double suited queens. Okay, 35% of rainbow kings, 78% of single suited kings, including just like a five high suit, 5-4 there. Um, so one good way to use this is just to review. I guess you could use it in game too. Static charts, I think, are usually allowed. This is a static chart. Um, I've never actually used the starting PLO starting chart in game. Playing online. Um, but you don't have to know it exactly anyway, and you can just when you're doing your session review, you can just go look. Was I close? You can develop a pretty good sense for this stuff just by playing, and you don't have to be exact. You can play a little tighter than this suggests. That's gonna end up making your post flop decisions a little easier. But just some stuff to look. King Jack 10-8 with a 10 high suit from under the gun. Ace 10 9-8 with a 9 high suit. That's one that I'm gonna miss for sure. Some of them ace 3 6 7 double suited. I would probably find that 6-5-4-2 double suited. I might not open. So here the MP ranges. They call it hijack, but it's under the gun, hijack, cutoff, button, small blind, big blind. I call it MP. Um, Hijack's more of a full ring terminology, in my opinion. But again, worst open, so 3-3 King Jack, 4-4 Deuce Deuce Rainbow, Ace 4 Jack Deuce double suited, Ace Jack 10-8 Rainbow. And yeah, it just gives you an idea. They've also got some cool charts here that also, you know, tell you what to raise or fold or three bet or whatever. Hook cutoff opening quite wide, 30%. And button, I haven't included the small blind ranges. Sometimes you want to limp the small blind too if your opponent in the big blind is kind of passive. So again, I'm going to link this chart in the description. You can get it. It's free. You just go there, you give them an email, you sign up, and they've got some other cool free charts, very useful. And I recommend checking out their website. They got a lot of great articles. They got a lot of great videos actually online. Some really top-notch PLL content. Upswing Poker. This is Doug Polk. Really solid organization, and they have a training site if you want to sign up. All that jazz. Again, gonna link this in the description, and you can get these charts. Honestly, if you just understand the GTO RFI ranges, that's going to set you ahead of your competition. Micro stakes, even low stakes. That's gonna give you a really good foundation. And then you do need a solid game plan for post flop. Pay attention to this video. We're going to get into that right now. Okay. All right. So what about we've dealt with RFI. We've dealt with it's folded to you. You're in whatever position. What about when somebody raises in front of you? Okay. So the first thing is, we're gonna three bet our strong hands. Ace Ace Jack 10, Ace King Jack 10 double suited. We're gonna three bet these against pretty much anybody. Now the more aggressive our opponent, the wider we can three bet for value within reason. We don't adjust too much because we got to worry too about the other players at the table. We want to make sure we're not going to value cut ourselves too often. And we're three betting some hands for deception and balance. Jack 10 9-8 suited. Also for fold equity on high card boards or more static boards. If it comes, deuce deuce, and we three bet, they're going to think we've got like an overpair a lot, and it's going to be hard for some hands to continue that are in very good shape against us. So I do recommend a conservative approach when you're playing versus a raise. You want to do a lot of folding. Outside of the button and the big blind, you want to play raise or fold style for the most part, mostly folding. Um, this is because, if somebody raises under the gun, you flat an MP, people can get it coming behind you relatively cheap, and now you're squeezed. They can 3-bet. You're just exposing yourself. So you can have a flattening range if you want an MP, but it's very small. It's not a huge range, and it's going to include some aces, so you can flat 4-bet, that sort of stuff. Um, versus a tight opener, when you have loose players still to act, call becomes more attractive with some hands that you normally 3-bet in a vacuum. Okay, so you don't want to isolate yourself against the tight range, especially if it's a very nitty opener. You want to invite the fish into the pot. They're going to get in there with their weak hands, okay? And that's going to give you a lot of value. You'd rather be playing against a tight range and a loose range than just a tight range. And then these hands that they're playing, they're like King 9-7-2 with like a 7-high suit. Okay, these hands are very difficult to play after the flop. They're going to flop a lot of one pair and might be dead. They're going to have to play passively. And there's going to be a lot of opportunities for them to make mistakes. So you want to encourage them to get into the pot, and they're going to be a lot easier to take advantage of. After the flop, they're going to make mistakes. They're going to suffer from compounding errors. It's just the nature of the hands that they're playing when they're playing very loose. From the small blind, you want to raise or fold mentality. And this is you're going to be out of position, so by 3-betting, you can ameliorate that disadvantage, positional disadvantage, and you're going to be targeting late position opens that not always that strong. You're going to make your opponent be the one who has to guess whether or not you hit the flop. Better to 3-bet too rarely than too often, especially in micro stakes, low stakes games. Okay, a few reasons for this. A lot of your opponents are going to have very tight opening ranges. They're going to be passive guys. They're going to be limping a lot, calling a lot, and they're going to be raising very tight ranges that you simply can't 3-bet a lot against. Okay, your stats will tell you that if you've got a tracker, you need a tracker. The other thing is that there's going to be so many opportunities, post-op opportunities to stack your opponents that it's not going to matter. So most of your money is going to come from your opponents making really loose calls with hands that have very low equity after the flop. So what you're doing before the flop is not too important. Whereas having an aggressive 3-bet game is more important in tougher games where you're fighting for every pot, where you just can't give anything up, because your opponents aren't going to make these egregious post-flop errors. You don't have to auto 3-bet aces, especially if you do not have an aggressive dynamic. The more aggressive your dynamic, the more you want to 3-bet because you might get 4-bet. But if you've been playing very passively post-flop, you get into this sort of trap, or pre-flop, where you have to sort of play your aces passively too. Otherwise, you're going to be face up, and you can't win if your cards are face up. Don't play bad aces face up deep, especially out of position. All right, couple flop fundamentals here. Flop situations are derived from pre-flop configurations. Okay, so the pre-flop action is going to determine your post-flop decisions. So, for example, if you're 3-betting pre-flop, then this is going to impact your range. And now, if an ace comes, okay, you're going to be like continuing with your whole range because you have such a huge advantage on this board because of pre-flop range, especially in a low 3-bet situation. It's going to have a lot of aces, maybe like half your range is aces, and so you can bet your whole range of impunity. Your opponent just has to fold a ton and then call a bit to try to harmonize ranges and get to a situation where he's competitive on the turn. Now, another thing is sometimes your opponents are going to be coming to the flop with extreme ranges. You've got very loose players; they're playing very wide ranges. Then so this is going to translate into them having weak hands after the flop at a much higher frequency, which is going to impact on your strategy. You can play a very aggressive strategy if you expect your opponent to be weak at a high frequency. Your decisions are also going to be influenced by your opponent's playing style. So against a passive player, you can get away with a lot of different strategies or approaches because they're not going to be putting you to the test. Whereas if your opponent is more aggressive, then you need to start playing in a more intelligent fashion and not allowing them to exploit you. This means sometimes you have to check with medium strength or even strong hands. Uh, a lot of draws that you would love to semi bluff with, you might start checking some of these. And that brings us to our next point, which is don't be afraid to check. Okay, yes, betting is great. Betting can win us the pot, but checking there's also a, a very good place for checking. You know, when you have medium strength hands that can't really bet for value, you're in position. You know, some of the time it is best to just check the back. Same thing with some draws. You know, if you can't stand a check raise, you're against an opponent aggressive player, then sometimes you have to respect that aggression and you have to check. Whereas against a weaker opponent, you could go ahead and you can try the bet. And, you know, usually the worst case scenario is unless they have the nuts or a very strong hand, they're just going to check call, in which case it's not the end of the world. You can still improve and then put in a punishing value bet in a larger pot. Or sometimes you can appear to improve and win the pot with a bluff. In general, a fairly aggressive strategy is advised, especially heads up. Less so when you're out of position, especially against a good player. Then you know you have to start thinking about your overall strategy over 3 streets. If you don't have a strong range or equity advantage, there's nothing wrong with playing a high check strategy. While against a passive opponent, you could easily just put all your good hands into bet. Against a more difficult opponent, you're definitely going to have to make sure you're not check giving up at a very high rate. So you're going to have to check call. You're going to have to check raise, and you can't do that if you're putting all your good hands in bet. Right? We love to bet. We love to bet with our good hands, but you have to think about exploitation and your opponent's strategy and how that's going to interface with your strategy. And there's some really good metagame benefits here too. You know, you go check call 3 streets, and your opponent sheepishly turns over a bluff. You know, you're gonna look like a wizard, and they're gonna be very careful about screwing with you in the future. All right, let's consider a hand example. So here we have already a mistake. We're facing a under the gun raise from MP, and this hand is simply not strong enough to continue. We should fold. We get 3-bet, call. I think at this point, actually, the call is fine. This is a hand that's going to play okay multi-way, and we are closing the action. Now, at this point, With the bet in front of us, we have top two pair and a draw. Very easy decision to go all in. And we end up scooping. Let's look at perhaps a more instructive example. So we open 9-9-7 Jack, double suited under the gun, a very clear open. And we get called by the small blind, a loose player who's going to be continuing with a very wide range. So this is a very common and useful situation to analyze in Pot Limit Omaha. You're in position, heads up against a loose player with an inferior hand. This is a very profitable situation and one that's going to give you a lot of flexibility. So you have a tight range. You're opening from under the gun. Our opponent should have a very tight range calling from the small blind, but because he's a loose player who's playing 58-60% of hands, he's going to have a loose range. So on the flop, that's going to translate into a range and an equity advantage for you, as well as an advantage in terms of how frequently you have the nuts. Opening from under the gun, you're going to have a lot of ace-ace. You're going to have a lot of top pair with spades. This texture, it's a little in favor of our opponent too, in that he'll have more around the 4-6, but then just the general weakness of his range is going to translate into weaker post-flop situations as well. When you're playing 60% of hands, you're playing a lot of hands that simply do not flop well. So we go ahead and c-bet. This is pretty clear. We've got equity. We can get a lot of hands to fold. Hands like ace-x could easily fold. Maybe they shouldn't, but they could easily fold. We've got the flush draw ourselves, so we've got that equity. We're going to hit a flush a decent amount of times. Our nines, we can hit a 9 and have a very strong disguised hand. We've got backdoor diamonds. So we can deny a lot of equity from hands that are very live against us but think they could easily be dead. We can win the pot right away. Our opponent is very passive, so we're less likely to get faced with something like a semi-bluff check raise that could be very dangerous. More likely he's going to call or fold and just check raise with very strong hands like three of a kind, or maybe aces up with a flush draw, stuff like that. So we bet, he checks. We turn a jack, which is a very interesting card. It doesn't really improve our hand, but we've got a jack, so it's less likely that this improved our opponent's hand. And this could easily have made us aces and jacks, 3 jacks. We could have easily flopped a big hand pre, or on the flop rather. So my opponent checked, and I make a decent sized bet. Now, we could have checked back too. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. That's a very intuitive, fine way to play. But I like the bet. I think that our opponent is going to definitely fold some hands that have the odds to continue. We could still have the best hand. Probably won't a lot of the time, but he could easily have been on like a 6 and a draw, a 4 and a draw on the flop. If he found a PL with like king, no spades, that'll be very hard pressed to continue. A lot of one pair aces hands might just fold now, worried about drawing dead. We still got equity if we hit on the river. Might get paid off on a 9 or a jack. Might get paid off on spades, especially if he makes like a straight at the same time. And he folds. Alright, let's look at another example. So the action starts with a small raise under the gun, and we call in the cutoff. This is fine. Our hand is stronger than in the previous example. We're also closer to the button. The button's a loose player that we want to invite into the pot. and the raise is smaller. We flop absolutely nothing. We face a bet and we fold. Nice and simple. All right, let's talk a bit about flop texture. So, the first category of flops we're going to call static boards. And those are 2-2-10. Of course, 3-3-3 or 4-4-4, any sort of trips board would also be highly static. Then we've got Jack 8-3 with 3 clubs. Flush boards are highly static in Pot Limit Omaha. The 4th club does not change anything. So the only way to go to a superior hand if somebody has a flush is for the board to pair, which is very uncommon, especially if you have just 2 pair. Now, if you don't have a flush, there's the possibility of a straight coming. So that's sometimes a factor, but much less so. And then in the third sort of hyperstatic board is Queen 7-2 or King 7-2. Here we've got King 7-3, which is also pretty static. The only draw is either a gut shot or an inside wrap 4-5-6. King 8-3 would be even more static in that there is no straight draw available whatsoever. So that's a static board.